everybody. Thanks for joining us for this latest update of the Precision Brief. I'm Simon Spire, founder of Data Agents. We work with marketers who are sitting on more data than ever before, have got access to all sorts of AI tools, but they're struggling to make faster, better decisions. And our work is really about closing the gap between expectation and practical uses of data. So very much outcome focused, technology second. And the Precision Brief is a series of honest conversations with people who are experts in what moves the needle when it comes to marketing, and specifically data-driven marketing. So there's no panels, there's no script, no presentation. It's just useful tips and advice from people who've driven outcomes at the sharp end. And one of the things I've been fascinated by is synthetic intelligence, synthetic data. And I'm really pleased to have David join me today to kind of explore that a little bit more and talk about how synthetic research is really sort of permeating all facets of marketing. So, David, thanks so much for joining me. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Yes, I'm David Dobrin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Original Voices. And we're building what we call the human context layer for AI, and to bridge the gap between AI and its understanding of real people. It's powered by a consumer platform we've built, a network of digital twins where real people create, train and manage an AI version of themselves to answer questions and give feedback on their behalf. I've spent most of my career in the market research and consumer data space, mostly at YouGov, and Original Voices is the infrastructure for market research and consumer data in this AI world that we're now in.
Fantastic. Let's get into it. I'm really interested in synthetic research. I can see huge sort of real opportunities for it. And I think I'm sort of interested in where you started, really, because there's lots of solutions that seem to me, at least, to be sort of scraping information or working with existing research that might sort of exist within a brand. As you say, you're already taking that sort of human first approach to building it. So how does that work, and what was sort of behind your decision to build it that way rather than something that was a bit more of like a scraping approach?
Yeah, totally. So we started from the premise that in the age of AI, what real people think and how they see the world should matter more, not less. And that we wanted to find a way to leverage AI to amplify and augment rather than replace real people. And that was mostly driven from some solutions that we saw where they were building what I would refer to as like pure synthetic data, whereby they essentially scrape publicly available data on the web and other data sources and create fake or fictitious personas. So you might have a fake Simon who lives in New York or a fake David who lives in London. And the problem with that is that it's not based on a real person. And so you get like plausible sounding responses from no one real with no way to validate or follow up. And so we decided to take a different approach where we actively involve real people throughout the whole cycle. And so what that looks like in practice is we built a consumer application called Twinio, which is where real people create and train their own digital twin. So an AI version of themselves that they train by answering lots of questions and sharing data about all aspects of their life. And then once a twin is trained, it's able to leverage the knowledge it has on that person to answer a question or give feedback on their behalf. And key to the approach is that there's always a real person involved. So they train their twin, they update their twin because we have access to the real people. We can ask them new questions whenever we need to enrich their twin. And also they validate their twin. So whenever a twin answers a question for them, they get a notification, they can rate and review the answer and they give feedback. And so we have this ongoing validation and feedback mechanism. And so there's a big debate about whether the future is, quote unquote, real people or synthetic. And our answer is that it's both, but not as separate solutions as one. And so the beauty of our approach is that you can go in and you can describe an audience in natural language. We'll find a set of relevant digital twins, and you can ask questions or put concepts to them. It could be a website or a product, and get instant data and insights. And because we have access to the real people, we can always go back to them to survey them or do an AI interview with them to learn more about them. You can get the data from that research, and then that data can enrich their twin profile. And so you can go to that segment of twins, ask questions with that enhanced knowledge and grounding from the data and insights that those real people have shared. And so it's like very much a hybrid solution where we are leveraging AI, but it's fundamentally grounded in real people.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think done well, it unlocks a sort of better, faster, cheaper approach for marketers. With the brands that you're working with, are they working differently because they can use this approach, or is it substituting for sort of, I guess, more sort of traditional research that they might have been doing in the past?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. So the other unique thing about what we're doing is that we've built Original Voices as an API and an MCP first. And so what that means in practice is that we have built a standalone tool, but really the power of what we've done is that you can access Original Voices inside of the AI tools or agents that you already have and are using. So you can be in Claude and you can describe an audience and get data and insights from the digital twin network that comes back inside Claude. And so what that means in practice is that it massively extends the actionability of the data and insights, because historically you would run research and you would end up with a PowerPoint or a report, which is actually quite difficult to action. Whereas when the data is made available directly inside of these AI tools, you can leverage that data and insights to inform or ground any workflow that you're already using those tools for. And so the key thing that we're seeing is that we have some customers that are using it for audience research and understanding in the traditional sense. And the power of it is the speed and the depth, because you can keep asking additional questions just like you would in ChatGPT or Claude. So you're not just confined to one set of questions. You can see the data and insights that comes back, and you can ask 10 more questions or 5 more questions to dig further. So there's speed and depth. But also, because we make the data available inside of these tools, then marketeers can leverage it, for example, to inform their ad or creative copy. So rather than just relying on Claude to make assumptions about what matters to an audience, when it comes to creating Facebook ads, for example, Claude has context about what this audience thinks and feels about this product or topic, and can leverage that data and insights to create much more relevant and targeted ad creative, for example. And the same for like pre-testing and validation. And so what we're seeing is some customers are using it for research in the traditional sense, where it's much faster, much deeper, and much more granular. But also that the data is highly actionable for lots of additional use cases, including marketing, because we make the data available inside Claude or ChatGPT.
Yeah. Having worked with you and worked with the tool, it's the fact that it's sort of so integrated into those surfaces, I think, is the power of it, because you can just be asking questions on the fly as you're exploring a territory or an idea. You can be getting consumer feedback in the chat immediately. There's no sort of, okay, I'm going to stop here and now I'm going to go and brief something and I'm going to wait for it to come back. So yeah, I think the fact that it is sort of so, gives you such a sort of holistic view so quickly is the power. But it does force, I think, it does force the marketer to work a little bit differently in terms of the sort of process, or it gives you the opportunity to work differently so that it's faster, it's more iterative and sort of free flowing. I guess one of the things I'm really interested in at the moment across all the work that I do is that your platform, the things that we do with data and so on, Obviously, there's so much power in AI in terms of harnessing data, making it accessible, but it's still really, the outcome is really only as good as the question being asked of it.
Yeah.
And so I was just interested in that sort of ability to work in a more sort of free form way with, real customer consumer feedback and input. Does that mean that you need to think differently about the questions that you ask and how you work differently? And sort of are there best practices that you're starting to uncover through all the work that you're doing?
Yeah, totally. It's a really good question. So the input when you first start with original voices is flexible. So if you're using original voices in Claude or ChatGPT, you can define an audience, and then it's possible for you, if you have a specific set of questions that you want to ask, then you can include those questions in the prompt, and we'll ask those exact questions to the digital twins. So if you are an expert researcher and or you know exactly what you want to ask and how you want to ask it, then you can include those questions in the prompt, and we'll ask those questions. And the same principles that have always applied apply here, where like the quality of the question will determine the quality of the output or the results that you get. Equally, we find that some customers don't necessarily know exactly what to ask and how to ask it, but they have a very high level sense of like the topic that they want to explore. And so in that scenario, we've created a set of skills that instruct Claude the types of questions to ask and how to ask it. And so like we remove the burden or the heavy lifting on the user, which enables them to say something along the lines of, I'm interested in how dog owners in the UK manage and monitor their dog's health and well-being on a day-to-day basis. And when that type of prompt comes in, then Claude will automatically defer to one of the skills that we've created, where we tell Claude the types of questions that they should construct in order to get like the most relevant outputs. And so it might take the topic and come up with 12 really high quality questions, and then those questions go to the digital twins. And so we try and flick between both sort of scenarios depending on what the user wants. So if they want to ask their set of questions, they absolutely can do that, and the quality of those questions will determine the quality of their results. And or if they're not sure what to ask or how to ask it, then we've created a set of skills that enables them just to define a topic, and we'll come up with the most relevant questions to ask. But ultimately, in either scenario, you're right that what you ask and how you ask it will ultimately determine the quality of the data and insights that you get back. What I would say is the beautiful thing is that it's not like a survey where you've got like one chance to ask a good set of questions and you get the results and you're like, oh, I should have asked this question, this question, this question. Like if there is something you miss and or if something comes back that you want to dig in further, the great thing is that you can just ask that, because you're not confined in any way to like a project or a scope. And so there's like quite a practical element to this as well.
Yeah. And in the work that I've done with you, it's worked really well from that almost like a sort of focus group, as qual type,
Yeah, absolutely.
exploratory type stuff. I think you were saying before there's another use case which is around optimizing ad copy, those sort of things. And I suspect also through using some of the capabilities now in Claude, you could almost be using it for sort of repeated surveys, repeated pulses, and so on. Is there a sort of particular focus or a particular area that you think it's particularly strong in?
Yeah. So our goal is quite simple, which is to bridge the gap between AI and its understanding of real people. And the thesis is that use of these AI tools is proliferating. So that's people using ChatGPT or Claude and increasingly AI agents. And they're incredibly powerful. They generate content and answers at like extraordinary speed and scale. But the main problem is that a model only knows what it's been trained on. And in our context, it doesn't know what real people think and feel about a particular topic, brand, product, or service. And so our thesis is that without the right context, the outputs tend to be generic or off the mark, or what I describe as confidently wrong, where AI is a good copywriter. And so you get outputs that are like plausible and look and sound good. But actually, because they've made assumptions about an audience, the output, even though it might read and look good, isn't necessarily relevant to the audience for which it's intended. And so that's where we want to bridge the gap by building what we call the human context layer, where we make data and insights about particular audiences available in the context window of an AI model or agent to ground its decision making and outputs in real human perspective rather than AI guesswork and assumptions. And so in that context, anything that you're using these AI tools, models, or agents for, where the output is something that someone is going to read or consume or use, we want to be the layer where we're either informing that output and or pre-testing or validating it. And so where we're seeing a lot of success is in, I guess, like in the creative space, where instead of just getting like quite generic outputs from Claude, where it might describe a product or a feature, but won't necessarily talk to the audience. It won't necessarily address their concerns, their preferences, the language that they use. And that's what Original Voices enables. Likewise, for landing page copy, we've had customers that have rewritten their landing page to reflect the insights from their target audience. Same with product descriptions, email campaign and content. So what we're really seeing is that anything that AI is being used in this context could benefit from data and insights from real people to either inform and or pre-test and validate outputs. So it's fairly broad, but like at a very high level, our goal is to make data available to these tools so that you can A, differentiate your outputs, and B, make them more relevant, targeted, and personalized.
Yeah, very interesting. I think particularly in the marketing space and with the use of agents, the discipline is almost keeping the rigor as the speeds up and as things get faster. And so that human context layer and how that gets baked in almost from the outset, I think is incredibly powerful. Obviously, there's the sort of input from Original Voices and the digital twins that you're building. Do you see there's opportunities to be bringing in data from other sources to make that context layer as rich as it possibly can be?
Yeah, so the way we think about what we're doing is that everything we do is on an individual level. So each digital twin represents a real person who has answered questions or shared data about themselves. And so like we maintain that one-to-one relationship on an individual level. Now it might be that individual answers questions, it might be they connect other data sources, and we bring all of that context into that particular twin profile. But what we do, and I guess what we specialize in, is that one-to-one relationship between a digital twin and a real person, so that you can describe an audience and we'll find, say, 25 or 30 digital twins that meet that audience criteria for you to research and bring data and insights into your AI flow. That's like what we do. But the way we see it being implemented in practice is like that's like the vertical. That if you say you have an AI agent, we want to be the human context layer where it's like data and insights from real people on a particular topic, brand, or product that feeds into the agent. But that agent will be able to leverage other data sources in addition to ours to give it like a holistic sense of either who an audience is and or a broader topic that they're sort of working with. And so that might be an agent does use a web scraping tool to scrape Reddit or customer reviews or customer testimonials. They bring that into the context window. And then that agent uses Original Voices to do, I guess, quote unquote, primary research with a target audience to bring that into the context window. The agent might leverage some internal data to bring that into the context window. And so our goal isn't necessarily to bring in other data sources into our product, but is to make a unique data source available to these AI agents who may use it in addition to other data sources or different types of context that they may be able to bring in.
Yeah. I think there's a very interesting opportunity to sort of triangulate the data that you have with first-party data, because I've worked in so many projects where you've got incredibly rich first-party data in terms of, at a customer level, what do we know about them? where do they live, and then how do they behave? How often do they visit? How much do they spend? What promotions do they respond to? What price points are they most sensitive to? Which channels do they use? All of those sort of things. Traditionally, you'd also then have research, which you can start to infer by the age of somebody or where they live that they're going to be like those people in your first party data. But it's always quite hard to make that link. Whereas I think there's something that could be really interesting given on what you know about the twin, and
Yeah,
actually how do you then surface that and connect it to that first party data. So as well as the attitudes and interests and everything that you can surface through the twins, you can actually then connect it right the way through to value.
totally. So one of the products that we haven't officially launched it, but we are working with customers on it, is this idea of a private twin network, which is exactly what you described, where we can go to a retailer or a brand and enable them to create a private twin network out of their existing customers and customer data. And that can take a few different shapes. One is that we can leverage all of the data that they already have on their individual customers and enable them to create a digital twin audience out of that data. And or we can make surveys or AI interviews available to that retailer or brand to invite their customers to participate in further research. And then that data can further enrich the twin profile. And then what they end up with is a digital twin audience of their customers specifically, that they can do all the use cases that I mentioned earlier. So it might be someone might be using it for research, or someone might be using it for their ad creative or to test some messaging. And so I think that's I think a good example of what you've just described, which is that how can you leverage your existing first party data with the twin infrastructure that we've built, so that you can create a digital twin version of your existing customers that are essentially available for querying whenever you need to and across the organization. So we've got a few projects on in exactly that space. We haven't formally launched or announced a product yet, but we are actively working in that space. I think it's a really exciting opportunity because it's another way to activate the existing first party data that you might already have and just make it incredibly useful across different teams within a business.
Yeah, it's really, really exciting. We should definitely explore
Yeah,
that a bit
yeah,
more. Very interested in that. I guess there's a couple more sort of general sort of things that I'm seeing quite a lot of at the moment. I'm just sort of interested in your take on them. I think as models start to become a bit sort of commoditized, and
yeah,
they will start to level off, and so the data is the thing that is left to sort of compete on, I
yeah,
guess.
yeah,
Um, and because of that, I think there's a lot of expensive models that are going to be used for things that they don't need to be used for.
totally.
And there's a hidden cost that at the moment is unknown, and people just sort of default to the latest model. I guess, is that something you're seeing, and is your solution sort of predicated on certain models from certain vendors, or actually is the model commoditized and your data asset at whatever model is the best fit?
Yeah, it's exactly the latter. So the main thinking is that everyone has access to the same models. So whether you're using the latest and greatest or you're using an open source model, there are a defined set of models that pretty much everyone has access to. And the main thing that where sorry, let me start again. The When everyone has access to the same few models, there's sort of two problems that emerge. One is differentiation, because everyone has access to the same few models. Outputs often look and sound the same. And the second is relevancy. Is all of these models don't know what real people think and feel, and so they guess. And so our bet is that the future and the winners won't necessarily be those that are using the latest AI models because everyone has access to them. It will be those that are feeding those models better context. and that's where we want to that's where we want to play and be that context layer. And so we're sort of agnostic in a sense of like what model someone may be using themselves or what model one of their agents may be using. Our thesis is the same, is that whatever model you're using, you need to add this context layer in order to make your outputs and outcomes as good as possible.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think in a way, it's the way it's always been. The data is the moat, and the model is just the delivery mechanism. The value is in the data.
Totally.
Historically, it would have been you would
Yeah.
get an analyst to do a model on some data, and they might have a different flavor to somebody else. That's obviously changing now in terms of models are open source or widely available, but it's all predicated on the context that you're putting into it, and that's really the value and the asset of any brand.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's like three broad types of like context. So what a lot of people are doing, and it's great, I'm not saying they shouldn't do that, is you can scrape the web. So you can like go to Reddit or customer reviews or whatever it might be, and bring that context into the window. And that's fine. And it definitely helps. Like doing that is better than not doing that. But everyone has access to the web data. And so in theory, anyone can also do exactly the same thing. And so there's not necessarily an edge there. The second layer is whether you can leverage internal proprietary data, and that definitely makes a difference. And then we're betting that there's going to be this like third layer, which is different from the first two and brings that unique customer perspective that might not be reflected in your internal proprietary data because you haven't asked those types of questions, or it's not as like granular, and or isn't available just from scraping Reddit, for example. And so we're not saying that we're going to be the only like layer in this stack, but we are saying that there are certainly limitations to just scraping the web, not least because everyone can also do that. And we're sort of making the bet that you can add this additional proprietary data source to differentiate what you're doing, as well as making it more relevant and targeted and personalized.
Totally. I think generally as the whole space is maturing, I think sources like Reddit and so on are going to diminish in their importance. We already see it in things like AI search, which 9, 12 months ago everybody was piling into Reddit because that's what the LLMs were scraping to decide what answers to surface. But they've matured so quickly, and I'm not saying that's not still an important source, but I think that the battleground will be proprietary data.
Totally.
And actually, I think there's really interesting opportunities to unlock value in proprietary data that hasn't been explored before. So we've been working with a client to access their call center data, which had been, only ever used for sort of operational metrics and reporting. But actually, the verbatim insights that you get from actually listening to a customer and how they're feeling and what issue they're grappling with and whether they really are satisfied at the end of the call, or all of those sort of things. If you're then aligning that with who that customer is and how long they've been a customer and how much it costs to acquire them, that's fascinating. And it's been so difficult to bring those things together historically, but now you can start to actually unpack that, understand it, and then if you're overlaying your information on top of that, to me that's just a treasure trove of information that has always kind of existed in different silos, but actually there's an opportunity now to put it together and make sense of it.
Yeah, totally. It's one, the fact now that we have AI, it means you can do these things now. And then two, it matters more than ever to use it and deploy it, because not only can you, but it's like critical, I think, to give you that edge. So yeah, it's super interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think, and it also comes back to what are the how do you want to use it? What are the outcomes you want? What are the questions you want to ask for it? That, so it needs to start strategically and then drill down.
Absolutely.
That's probably a good point for us to pause and leave it, David. But I mean, it's so interesting. I think there's so much opportunity around what you're doing, and I think that context layer is absolutely the right way to be thinking about things. So it's going to be very interesting to see how you develop it out. And yeah, really looking forward to partnering with you on projects as we progress.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you very much.
Great to see you. Thanks for your time. We'll speak soon.